Chapter 19 of Campfire Girls in the Allegheny Mountains. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Campfire Girls in the Allegheny Mountains by Stella M. Francis. Chapter 19. The Subterranean Avenue. For more than half an hour Mr. Stanlock waited upstairs nervously, eagerly, expectantly, apprehensively, for a report from Lieutenant Larkin and the four men who remained in the cellar of the Backholtz house to move the pile of scrap lumber, under which it was suspected might be found a clue as to the whereabouts of the missing 12 girls. Interest in the search within the building had suspended other activities in the neighbourhood, as it was felt that further progress might depend upon results at this point. So the score or more of uniformed and citizen policemen waited as patiently as they could in or around the house of mystery, becoming more and more impatient as the minutes grew into the 20s and then the 30s, and still nobody came upstairs to announce indications of success or failure. The noise of the striking pieces of lumber against one another had not been heard for more than 20 minutes. In fact, no sound of any kind came up the cellar way following the first quarter of an hour of rapid labour on the part of the 5 active searchers below. At last one of the men, more nervously eager for information than the rest, shouted down the cellarway to the lieutenant, inquiring how he and his helpers were getting on. There was no answer. He shouted again, still no reply. Then he announced his intention to descend into the cellar to investigate. "Wait," said Mr. Stanlock. "There are some tracks in the dust on the steps, and Lieutenant Larkin doesn't want them disturbed. Let me go." Although his apprehensions had not diminished, the mine owner's nerve was considerably strengthened by this time, perhaps as a result of his return from a stuffy basement atmosphere into a region of better ventilation. As he started down the steps with the flashlight of one of the policemen in his hand, he was surprised to feel a strong current of wind blowing upward into his face. They must have opened one of the windows, he surmised, but he quickly dismissed the suggestion after flashing his light around the cellar. The pile of lumber had been moved to the opposite side, and in the section of the floor it had formerly occupied was a hole 3 feet in diameter. "That's where the wind comes from," Mr. Stanlock decided. "It's the mouth of the old mine we used to hear about years ago. But where's the other opening? Funny nobody knows about that. This end has been covered up with that old heavy door and concealed with a layer of earth." When our men moved the pile of lumber, they observed that the earth had been disturbed recently and shovelled it away and found this hole. Mr. Stanlock directed the rays of light into the hole and discovered a flight of steps cut into the hard clay. "The lieutenant and his men are down in there," he concluded. "I think I'll follow them." He descended cautiously into the hole. Half a dozen irregularly formed steps brought him to a slope leading downward on an inclined plane of 6 or 7 degrees. He was astonished at the degree of preservation of the walls, ceiling and supports, considering the years that had elapsed since the mine was last worked. The passage continued as a downward slope for about 50 yards, and then became almost level for a like distance. Only in 2 places had the walls or ceiling fallen into any considerable extent, and in neither of those places was the obstruction so great as to constitute an impassable barrier. As he proceeded, Mr. Stanlock peered ahead anxiously, in the hope that he would discover the lights of Lieutenant Larkin and his companions. But he walked nearly 100 yards through an irregular and characteristically jagged passage before he caught sight of anything indicating that there was anybody besides himself in the abandoned mine. Then suddenly, rounding a sharp point, he came upon the advance party of searchers approaching him. "What did you find?" the mine owner inquired before any surprised greetings could be exchanged. "There's another outlet to this place somewhere, isn't there?" "Yes, there is," was the reply of the officer in charge. "This gallery runs on for another 100 yards, piercing Holly Hill right through the centre. You know the bluff and the rocky slope behind the old mill? Well, it seems that this mine was cut right through at that point, but there was a cave-in that filled up the opening. These rascals that kidnapped the girls evidently were associated with the people that rented the Backholts place and cut the passage through. The girls have been here all right, but they're gone. They've been taken out of this end of the mine and spirited away in some manner. This means that the scoundrels have a larger and more effective organisation than we have ever suspected. Such a case of wholesale kidnapping was never heard of before." "How can you tell they passed through here?" Mr. Stanlock asked. "By this principally," the lieutenant answered, holding up a woman's handkerchief that had been picked up, "and by the fact that there is a trail in the snow from the opening of the mine to the alley behind the old mill." Mr. Stanlock's face shone deathly pale in the glare of the flashlights. The new element of suspense had brought him again to the danger point of collapse that had compelled him to withdraw from the active search nearly an hour before. His voice reflected the distressing strain under which he was labouring as he put his next question. "What became of them, then?" "That's the problem we've got to solve," Larkin replied. "Apparently they were loaded in automobiles and rushed off to some retreat of the scoundrels. How in the world could they do it without somebody seeing or hearing what was going on?" "Oh," said the lieutenant without a suggestion of doubt in his voice, "that wasn't very difficult if there were enough of them working together. The evidence of cleverness and skill is not merely so much in the handling of this affair at the mill end of the mine as at the house end. That was a mighty smooth piece of work, getting all of those girls into that old house, however it was done. Mark my word, you'll find that a very clever trap was set for them. But come on, we've got to get busy before the snow makes it impossible to follow them." End of chapter 19.